Have you ever felt like you're living in a world where genuine emotions have become a luxury, a place where your kindness is exploited, your sensitivity is twisted, and love is used as a weapon of control? If you've ever wondered whether your deep empathy is a gift or a curse, then this video is for you. Because today, we're not just talking about empaths, we're talking about a rare, powerful, and extraordinary group you may have never fully understood. Super empath. Those who don't just feel pain, but have the courage to face it, confront the truth, and walk in awakened awareness. Don't take your eyes off this video. Watch until the end, because I believe every moment in this journey could be the key to your awakening, healing, and rebirth. If you've ever questioned your worth in a relationship with a manipulator, or if you found yourself torn between compassion and self-sacrifice, what you're about to hear might forever change your lens on love, power, and freedom. And if this message resonates with you, please hit subscribe so you never miss a video about psychological awakening and rebuilding your true self. Because here, we don't just tell stories, we rewrite our lives. Part 1, Moral Sensitivity, the journey of the super empath. In today's world, crowded with the noise of information, prejudice, and increasingly thick social masks, there exists a rare group of individuals who seem to hear what no one else can hear, who feel what others overlook. They are not just kind or sensitive, they are empaths. Individuals whose nervous systems act like emotional antennas, constantly tuning in to sorrow, anxiety, or insincerity in their surroundings. They don't just perceive emotions, they absorb them into every cell of their being. When an empath walks into a room, they don't need words to know something's off. A fleeting glance, an unusual silence, a suppressed expression. They take it all in unconsciously, as if they were born to be mirrors for unspoken emotions. But behind this ability lies no magic. It is often forged in childhood wounds. When a child learns to scan the room, to gauge a parent's emotions in order to survive in an unsafe environment, emotions become a survival map. Yet, among empaths, there is a distinct subgroup. A group that not only feels deeply, but is aware of their feelings in real time. They are known as super empaths. And this is where the real journey begins. A super empath doesn't allow themselves to be swept away by the flood of emotion. They possess a rare capacity to feel deeply and to observe their emotions as if from the outside. They sense the chaos but do not shatter under it. They recognize they are being affected, yet they maintain enough awareness to choose their response. It is this conscious separation that makes them resistant to manipulation, and that makes them the greatest threat to a very specific type of person. To narcissism. To a narcissist, both empaths and super empaths initially appear as supply, a source of emotional energy, admiration, forgiveness, and unconditional compassion. The narcissist sees someone who always listens, always tries to understand, always offers one more chance. And for a while, they're right. Because empaths tend to believe in the good in others, they often project their own kindness onto the other person, believing that the narcissist is simply hurt, unhealed, and in need of love to become better. But here's where the difference emerges. The empath holds on to hope, while the super empath begins to see the truth. Not just a vague suspicion, but a systematic understanding. They notice the disconnect between words and actions. They begin to recognize the repeating psychological games, the loaded phrases, the punishing silence, the compliments that double as control mechanisms. And the narcissist's deepest fear isn't being hated, it's being seen for who they really are. When a super empath begins to uncover the patterns of manipulation, they don't react impulsively. They observe quietly, analyze carefully, and slowly withdraw from the emotional matrix the narcissist has so intricately woven. They don't need to fight with words. They win with awareness. And that awareness becomes a mirror, no longer reflecting the admiration the narcissist craves, but instead reflecting the raw truth, the emptiness, the repetition, and the fractured identity of the manipulator. And that's when the narcissist begins to feel insecure, the admiring gaze is gone, the silent compliance has vanished. In its place stands someone who's no longer easily controlled, no longer easily swayed, and most importantly, no longer needs them. And in the narcissist world, not being needed is the most crushing blow to their fragile, inflated ego. What makes the super empath different isn't that they've never loved deeply or never been hurt. They have cried. They have sacrificed. They have tried to understand others so intensely that they lost pieces of themselves, but they woke up. They stopped. They chose truth over attachment. At that moment, quiet, resolute, is the beginning of freedom. Part 2, the awakening moment, when the mirror of truth begins to reflect. The difference between an empath and a super empath doesn't lie in the intensity of the emotions they experience, but in the transformation of awareness, when they begin to see the truth behind the veil of manipulation. While an empath may get swept into the confusion of love and responsibility, the super empath, armed with sharp emotional intelligence, begins to notice the subtle signs that others often miss, the psychological games, the words that contradict actions, the inconsistency in the narcissist's very nature. They begin to understand this isn't just someone with unhealed wounds. It's a distorted psychological structure operating as a survival mechanism built on control, denial, and manipulation. A narcissist isn't simply a hurting person. There's someone who builds their entire existence on an empty ego that cannot survive without constant reflection from others. And the super empath, once the perfect source of supply, suddenly becomes a systemic threat. Not because they've turned cold, but because they no longer react the way they used to. No more anger, no more justifications, no more desperate attempts to understand. Just a calm, conscious silence. And to a narcissist, that is unbearable. The narcissist is used to dwelling in the safety of artificial admiration. They crave submission, emotional feedback, and someone to make them feel special, worthy, and loved, despite their flaws. But when the super empath stops feeding them emotional reactions and instead offers detached, conscious understanding, the narcissist's entire psychological structure begins to tremble, because what they fear most isn't rejection, it's being seen. At that point, the super empath is no longer an emotional supplier. They become a mirror that reflects a truth that can't be denied. And what that mirror reflects is no longer love, forgiveness, or admiration. It's truth, a truth unfiltered, uncolored by emotion, untouched by hopeful delusion, a raw truth. The narcissist is not someone who's in love. They are someone who uses love as a tool for possession. And that truth, even if never spoken aloud, exposes the entire emptiness beneath the narcissist's arrogant shell. Because if no one believes in the roles they perform anymore, then who are they? If no one feeds their hunger to be worshipped, can they even exist as a separate, independent being? This is the moment when the entire dynamic of the relationship begins to reverse. Once, the super empath was the giver of affection, patience, trust, time, forgiveness. But when they begin to recognize the recurring patterns and understand that their forgiveness doesn't lead to transformation, only to deeper manipulation, an inner shift begins to take place. They begin to withdraw not out of anger, but out of clarity. No longer searching for reasons to stay, no longer trying to heal someone who doesn't want to be healed. They realize love is not the same as accepting everything. True love cannot exist where truth is distorted, where emotions are weaponized, and where kindness is mistaken for weakness. And this is what makes the super empath so dangerously disruptive to a narcissist. They don't have to seek revenge to shatter the narcissist solution. They simply stop playing the role. They refuse to participate in the lie. And just like that, the emotional universe the narcissist built with themselves at the center begins to collapse from the inside out. And when the super empath stops responding, the narcissist reacts like someone losing control. They may rage, blame, slander, or even try to be good again, like in the beginning. But none of these behaviors come from true remorse. They stem from the fear of losing power. Because to the narcissist, the super empath was never seen as a person, only as a role, a function of their ego. And yet, the most profound thing the super empath does isn't just leaving, it's leaving with awareness. No resentment, no revenge, no need to prove anything. They simply choose truth and walk away in their own light. And that moment, quiet but thunderous, is the beginning of the collapse of an entire system of manipulation. No screaming, no dramatic confrontation, just one person choosing to stop playing the game. Part 3. When love becomes a chain and hope turns into shackles. There is a tragic pattern that often plays out in relationships between empaths and narcissists, one that is rarely recognized until everything has already fallen apart. This tragedy doesn't lie merely in betrayal, nor is it solely the result of clever manipulation. The true tragedy lies in a misplaced belief. The The belief that if I just love deeply enough, they will change. That belief isn't naive, it's a profound expression of compassion. The empath doesn't just see the person standing in front of them, they see the person that individual could become. They don't love only the present version, but also the unseen potential. They see the wounded child behind the toxic adult. They hear the fear hidden beneath the commanding tone, and they believe that love can heal. Because to an empath, love is sacred energy. But when that love is given to the wrong person, it becomes the most dangerous trap. Because the narcissist doesn't come to connect, they come to be served. They don't seek genuine understanding. They seek a mirror to reflect their greatness. And the empath, with their ever-open heart, becomes the perfect target. At first, it feels like a sweet dream. The narcissist knows how to paint the picture of perfect love. Timely compliments, thoughtful gestures, eye contact so intense, it makes one believe, finally, someone truly sees me. But in reality, it isn't true seeing, it's mirroring. The narcissist reflects exactly what the empath longs to feel, like a living mirror echoing the desires of its viewer. And so the empath opens up, they give their heart, they share their old wounds, they believe they've finally found someone who understands the depth of their emotions. But what they don't know is that everything they share is being mentally recorded, not to be held with empathy, but to be used. In the narcissist world, every piece of information can be weaponized. As the relationship progresses, what once felt like care becomes control. The sweetness fades, replaced by subtle criticism, extended silences, and cleverly disguised blame wrapped in the name of honesty. The narcissist begins testing their power. Will the empath retreat? Will they feel guilty? Will they keep compromising? And sadly, in most cases, the empath does. Because they believe this is love. They call their patience compassion, their pain sacrifice for something greater. But the truth is this: love should never require you to lose yourself. Love doesn't make you question your emotions. It doesn't make you afraid to speak up. It doesn't leave you wondering whether you're too sensitive every time you're hurt. If you have to silence your inner voice just to preserve the relationship, then it's no longer love. It's conditional endurance. A narcissist rarely reveals themselves from the beginning. They build everything through crafted imagery, sometimes flawless, to earn trust. But once they feel they have secured the empath's heart, the mask begins to fall. What once seemed like tenderness becomes a weapon. Kindness turns into obligation. Silence becomes punishment. And any remaining affection is wielded strategically to pull the empath back into a cycle of submission. This is no longer love. This is a one-sided psychological loop, where one person keeps giving because they believe it's the right thing, while the other keeps taking because they believe they deserve it. But empaths are not weak. They're simply living by values so noble, they don't realize they're being exploited. When the Super Empath, with their deep capacity for sensing and analyzing, begins to see this for what it is. They enter a moment of deep inner conflict because they're not just confronting the other person, they're confronting themselves, their own expectations, their illusions, their stubborn hope that love is enough to change everything. But then truth rises. The truth that not everyone wants to be healed. Not everyone is willing to surrender power in order to enter a relationship of equality. And most importantly, not everyone is worthy of unconditional love. When the super empath reaches this level of awareness, they begin to walk away, not with bitterness, but with clarity. They don't need an apology. They no longer need to play the savior. They just need to be themselves without paying for it in pain. Part 4, from blind hope to radiant awareness, the empath's turning point. In the relationship between the empath and the narcissist, the breaking point often doesn't come from cruel insults or explosive arguments. It comes in silence, a quiet exhaustion only those who have lived it can truly understand. It is the moment the empath, after countless emotional loops, suddenly realizes they no longer recognize themselves. They no longer see the light in their own eyes. They no longer trust their feelings. And perhaps most tragically, they begin to feel guilty simply for existing. This is the psychological erosion effect, the slow, deliberate kind of wearing down that the narcissist perpetuates, often unconsciously, but with alarming precision. Within this manipulative dynamic, the empath gradually loses the ability to distinguish between sacrifice and self-erasure. They constantly ask themselves, am I being too sensitive? Am I asking for too much? Maybe it really is my fault. These questions, instead of leading to self-understanding, become chains that imprison the soul. The empath no longer knows what's real and what's manipulation because the boundary between the two has been intentionally blurred. And it is within this ambiguity that the narcissist maintains their power. They don't need to control with rage. They control through the doubt they sow in others. But for the super empath, those rare individuals who both feel deeply and can rise above to observe, awakening is inevitable, not because they're stronger than others, but because they've endured long enough to understand true love does not require one to disappear. That's when they begin to wake up. No more confusion, no more clinging. They start to reconnect with their intuition, the inner voice that had been silenced by manipulation tactics like gaslighting, silent treatment, and reverse blame. They begin to realize, I love so deeply that I forgot who I was. And in that painful yet pure admission, a new space opens. The space of truth. The super empath begins to look back on their entire journey with new eyes, no longer clouded by hope or illusion. They no longer ask how to fix the other person. Instead, they ask, why did I ever believe it was my responsibility to fix them in the first place? That question, seemingly simple, is the turning point. It's not just a psychological realization. It's a complete shift in the inner operating system. They stop casting themselves in the role of the savior. They begin to see themselves as someone of value. From that moment on, giving is no longer an obligation. Forgiveness is no longer an instinct. Humility is no longer a default. They begin to choose. And with every choice, they rebuild their sense of self. Not a self meant to fight others, but one meant to come home to who they truly are. From the narcissist's perspective, this shift is a threat, because the entire structure of manipulation only works when the empath still reacts, still clings, still needs the relationship. But when the super empath stops responding in the old patterns, the narcissist becomes disoriented. They can no longer predict reactions. They can no longer control the other person's emotions. They're no longer the center of attention, and that is when the power drains away, not because anyone took it from them, but because someone simply refused to play the game. The super empath doesn't need to win, they only need to be free. That freedom doesn't come from shouting, I'm leaving. It comes in the quiet moment when they stop explaining, stop justifying, stop trying to understand. They simply walk away, leaving no reaction, no energy, only one clear truth. I am no longer here to fill the void for someone who never intended to heal themselves. And the strange thing is, this departure doesn't create a void. It creates space. Space to breathe again. Space to return home. Space to rebuild a self that was once shattered by loving the wrong person and giving in the wrong places. Awakening doesn't turn the super empath into someone hardened or cold. On the contrary, it makes him someone with clear boundaries, yet still an open heart. They still love, but not out of obligation. They still forgive, but not out of manipulation. They still listen, but no longer to be led astray. And above all, they have learned one essential truth. Love cannot exist without truth. Five, the night when the super empath stops reacting. The narcissist's collapse begins. There comes a pivotal moment in the journey of a super empath. A moment so eerily silent yet profoundly powerful when they stop reacting. They no longer explain, no longer try to convince, no longer attempt to clarify what the other person should have seen all along. And that silence, quiet, unassuming, unapologetic, is the most devastating blow to the fragile ego of the narcissist. The narcissist does not live off love, they live off reaction. Every explanation you give, every time you hurt and then forgive, every tear you shed for them, these are the fuel that sustains their emotional power. But when you withdraw that energy, when you no longer respond as expected, the entire manipulative structure begins to crack. This is no longer a relationship. It's a stage where the narcissist plays the lead role and you unwillingly have been cast as the emotional supplier. They write the script. Sometimes they're the victim, sometimes the hero, sometimes the misunderstood soul. And you're always pulled into the roles of healer, rescuer, or emotional caretaker. But when the super empath steps out of character, when they refuse to keep acting, the script collapses. The narcissist doesn't know what to do with someone who is no longer affected. They scramble, reverting to old tactics, the prolonged silence, the false fresh start, the dramatic displays of regret. But this time, the super empath, they don't react, they don't explain, and most importantly, they no longer need. And that very not needing is what the narcissist cannot tolerate, because their entire identity is built on being needed. They cannot exist as a whole person without someone else's reflection. The silence, the inner withdrawal, the breathtaking calm of the super empath becomes the ultimate rejection. They're not of their person, but of their game. And here, the super empath doesn't need to speak to bring the narcissist to collapse. They simply stop investing, stop watering a tree that never bore fruit, stop patching cracks that were never meant to heal. And when that energy flow dries up, the narcissist no longer has a mirror to reflect their grandiose self. They begin to panic. Don't be fooled. This panic is not love. It is the resistance of a power system unraveling. They will attempt to reclaim their position through emotion, through rage, through beautiful promises, even through feigned instability like threatening self-harm. But none of it is real. It's all designed for one purpose: to pull you back into orbit. The super empath, once awakened, realizes there is nothing left to return to. They understand that the forgiveness they once gave wasn't an act of love, but an extension of expectations they hadn't yet released. Now, there are no more expectations, no more attempts to understand, no more need for closure. They walk away, not to escape, but to choose themselves again. From a psychological perspective, this is the breaking of emotional dependency. It is the process by which someone once held back by hope and fear now steps out of the invisible prison they unknowingly helped build. No one pushes them out. They open the door themselves and walk away, with gratitude for what was learned, but with firm resolve never to repeat that lesson again. This withdrawal is not rebellion. It is deep emotional healing. This says, I no longer need to prove love by enduring pain. He says, I have the right to love myself first. And above all, it says, I no longer fear being alone more than I fear losing myself. From that moment on, the narcissist doesn't just lose a source of supply. They lose the final mirror, still reflecting the image they so desperately constructed. And when no one believes their story anymore, they're forced to face themselves. But they are unequipped for that. They've never learned how to look inward, and your absence becomes louder than any criticism could ever be. When the super empath leaves the relationship, the real transformation doesn't happen in the one left behind. It happens in the one who walks away. They are no longer the compromiser, the pleader, the one chasing empty apologies. They become someone true, with boundaries, with self-worth, and with the power of choice. This is the beginning of real freedom, a freedom not dependent on who sees you, who apologizes, or who regrets. A freedom born from no longer needing anything from the one who once made you lose your way. At some point in our journey toward emotional maturity, we must ask ourselves, is this love nourishing me, or is it slowly killing my sense of self? And if you are an empath, especially a super empath, you'll come to understand that not everything labeled as attachment is worth holding on to. The greatest thing you can do for yourself is not to forgive endlessly, nor to love until you're empty. It is to have the courage to walk away the moment you realize that staying would mean betraying your own soul. That is not surrender. That is a choice, a conscious, powerful choice. When you walk away from a relationship with a narcissist, you are not just leaving a person. You are stepping out of a cycle, a distorted belief system where you once thought love must come at the cost of suffering. But now you know, love does not require the sacrifice of self to survive. It requires truth. It requires boundaries. It requires you whole and intact. And that is the moment of your rebirth, not as a survivor, but as someone who has remembered who they are. You don't need revenge. You don't need to prove anything. Your silence, your withdrawal is the loudest declaration you could ever make. I am enough. Let your departure be more than the end of an old chapter. Let it be the prologue to a new story, one where you are the author, no longer a background character in someone else's performance. And if today you're still unsure, still wondering whether you're strong enough to walk away, remember this: you don't need certainty. You only need honesty with yourself. Never underestimate the power of awakening, because when you step out of illusion and choose truth, you don't just free yourself. You set a precedent for thousands of other souls still suffering in silence. If you see yourself in this story, if your heart is resonating with every word, click subscribe and join us, because the healing doesn't end when you leave them. It begins the moment you choose yourself, and you are worth it. You have always been worth it.